kind of word you like for that, but I would say technically they are member owned, because it has to be in their legal statutes, and that's what the law says. But of course, all the debate about Red Bull and all that stuff, there are many ways to not be member owned just on the paper. And I think what happens is, in their daily life, people are not really recognizing anymore that they are part of member-owned organizations. And so nobody would say, I'm a member in Germany of a fan-owned or a member-owned club. And everybody would just say, I'm a member of my club, for example, Werder Bremen or St. Pauli or Bayern Munich or whatever. And it's not nobody would highlight that it is a member organization. Only if you go to the AGM, maybe then it plays a role. And the huge difference to the UK is that I could see a lot of people are really highlighting that their clubs are member owned or community owned, and because that's not the normal way. And I think that's the huge differences, and that means people are much more aware about how to keep that fan-owned structure going and what are the benefits about it. While in Germany, people are sometimes forgetting about that, and they are, it's very easy to keep the people out of meetings or stuff like that. So there's always the risk that people lose control in the German clubs, and that's one point. And the other point, there was that really interesting case about the fans of Hamburg Sport Club, so our rivalry in the city. They left the main club and set up their own fan-owned team, and they always said they are the FC United of Hamburg, let's say. And it's a really nice project, but the problem is it never really, got that much attention as FC United or other of the UK teams, because for everybody else in that league, it was just a regular model how you set up a non-league club. And so that led them into kind of dilemma, let's say, because they had a huge amount of fans, and the other clubs at some point said, oh, they are too big. They had much more easy contact to sponsors and all that stuff. So you can't really take the fan ownership model from the UK and say we do the same in Germany. And I think the other way around, you can't just really expect that everybody has the same feeling about a football club should always be member owned.
Mm-hmm.
Or members run. I think I would make a difference between members run, you can become a member, or member owned, because technically I'm not owning St. Pauli. Yeah, that's okay for now.
Yeah, of course, more than okay. Luke, through your work at SD Europe, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, what's something that I've seen is quite a contrast between the experience at the European level and what we see in the UK when it comes to supporter ownership. And I think this is quite a challenge that we have here, and something that really needs to be addressed. Is I've had the luxury, the great experience to have been able to visit a few member-run clubs in Europe, one in Poland called Akersli, one in Belgium called YBSK Beveren. And what you see when you go there is that their members and the people that are involved in giving up their time are just so much younger. And, I look back, not to be ageist, but I look back, I was on the board of Supporters Direct a few years ago before it merged with the FSA. And, I'm involved with the Supporters Trust myself. And there isn't that turnover of younger people interested in supporter ownership or, fan activism or, the traditional Supporters Trust values. And I think there's a lot of work that's really got to be done there, because, I think there is a risk that, a lot of clubs in 40 years' time won't have this turnover of volunteers or people interested to want to stand to join a fan-owned club's board, which is just completely different. I mean, it'd be interesting to, hear what Fabian thinks about that in Germany. But from what I've seen when I've been in Europe, that it's just younger people involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really valid point. I had a friend from Austria who went to the Supporters Summit a few years ago, the SD and FSA Supporters Summit, and he liked it, he loved it, but he made a comment that the UK ultras, as he called them, were very old. It was quite a difference to in Austria and in Germany. Fabian.
Yeah, so since I did my research in England, not the whole UK, but in England and Wales, and my research is about young people in fan-owned or community-owned clubs, I would agree that it is not a big majority. Some clubs have a huge number of young people, but the problem is many of them struggle to really get them involved, because I think as a social pedagogue, I have a social pedagogical background, so that's the background of my PhD. I have to say that they are too much focusing on, people that are young offenders or stuff like that. So they do a lot of nice work like street level football and all that stuff, what's great. But the fan-owned clubs somehow miss that they should have young members, because they do a lot for young people, but there is a big gap between what they do on the streets, what they do in kind of what I would call social work, and they struggle to get these people into the clubs, and so there's a big gap. But there are young people, they just don't get them into the clubs, and that's strange. And I agree. So where we see most people in the clubs, that's where the ultra groups start, and a lot of clubs manage to get them into the clubs, and that also is a good balance between these people take over responsibilities so they can learn to act as democrats in their clubs, and in the same time maybe the ultras do less pyrotechnics if they know, I'm a member, I have a responsible job in the club, so I don't want to harm my club with 150,000 euros they have to pay for pyrotechnics in the end or stuff like that. So membership is always a good thing to get people more involved in this democratic structure and in responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the community-owned clubs in the UK have to focus more on. It's young people, and that will be the outcome of my PhD in the end, I think.
So how can they?
Well, I think they have to offer them volunteering. So I found a lot of people that like to volunteer, but some of the clubs use them as, like, let's say, little helpers or something like that. So they not really let them decide something. So they let them maybe do the turnstiles or let them sell the program or whatever. And I came over that. I have two examples I would like to share with you. I came over some kids at Clapton in London. Okay. And there was a young boy, he just went to the board and said, I want to set up a kids team as a member. And they listened, he went to the AGM, they let him make a suggestion, and then they tried to solve the problem with him, and he brought more kids, and now they are all connected to the club. That's one point. And the other is also to highlight what kind of safe spaces you could create. In Wrexham, I found a girl that I interviewed. She said that for her it's a safe space because she can go there as a member and she can decide stuff without her brother and her father. So there are also aspects of gender within that. And I think if you highlight these free spaces and opportunities to volunteer, that could attract more young people, because everybody's interested in football, and you just have to make them aware it's not only the Premier League.
Of course. So that takes us nicely onto Jonathan. Question for Jonathan, which is away from the Premier League and away. So, Jonathan, you mentioned in your introduction about the first season of Bangor 1876 has recently happened. Can you tell us a bit about that first season, your experiences, and also the role of fan ownership in that?
Well, I think in some ways our first victory was getting a team on the park competing in competitive football in the 2019-20 season, because it was only last month that we celebrated the first anniversary of an event in centre of Bangor where fans voted to form this new football team. And due to people working incredibly hard behind the scenes, within 3 months of that meeting, we're playing our first ever friendly match away to FC United of Manchester at a fantastic welcome, which we're tremendously grateful for. And by August, we were playing our first ever competitive match in the Gwynedd League, the fifth tier of Welsh football. I think fan ownership has really helped us to re-engage with the local community, because I think there have been a number of challenges within the last decade for football in Bangor. Bangor City, until 2011, played at Farrer Road, a sort of quite traditional old school ground, if you like, that had maybe been, its condition was an issue. There didn't seem to be money there to redo the ground. So what ended up happening was a supermarket bought the ground, and a new ground for Bangor City was built just on the edge of the centre of Bangor. That was, a lot of people saw that as a bit of a shame, understandably. Then in the period 2016 to 2019, there's a lot of discontent about how Bangor City were being run, and that ultimately led to the foundation of Bangor 1876. I think that our manager was talking recently in an interview about how there are people who maybe haven't been to watch football in Bangor for quite a few years, but all of a sudden, because they've seen the sort of positive community focus of what's happening at Bangor 1876, they're coming back now. And I think it re-energises the sort of connection between the people and a football club in Bangor. I mean, it's not just a connection between a football club and the community. The community is the football club, basically, with the fan ownership model. I'd say we are where we are because, in the first place, a group of fans voted in favour of setting up a new team, and because we have hundreds of members who decided to come along with us on the very exciting journey that we're on. And I think that creates a really sort of powerful bond between clubs and supporters, and supporters are the club. I know it's a cliche that we're hearing at a time when matches are being played without supporters. The repeating Jock Stein's famous phrase, "football without fans is nothing." I think there's a real truth to that.
Great, thank you. And so, moving on to Luke, could I ask you about Worcester City? So how did the club end up in community ownership, and what challenges did that transition present?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a roller coaster, and probably what I describe as quite a messy one. You know, there's never there's rarely a smooth path into community ownership, but sort of Worcester's route into it. I mean, the Supporters Trust has been fighting for community ownership since 2003, so it's been a long road. The cogs started turning this way in 2013 when the football club board at the time, they sold the club's ground in the city without having any solid plans for a new one, and then essentially spent the next 4 years trying to find a new ground in the city, somewhere to build it, whilst paying to play at a couple of grounds outside of Worcester, whilst we were competing in the National League North, which the club, it just didn't have the revenue to stay at. So they essentially had to spend the money that they'd got from the sale of the ground to just stay at that level, which eventually went, the money was running out. So in 2016, they applied for, the club board applied for double relegation in the January of the season, but didn't announce this. And nearing the end of the season, Worcester City actually got relegated. And what the club board didn't realise is that if you apply for double relegation and get relegated, you go down 3 times. So, which is, beyond incompetence. So then, the football club ended up in the Midland Football League Premier Division. Also, and then things really came to a head in 2017 when the last faint hope that the football club board had for a new stadium in the city fell through, at which point the Supporters Trust essentially had to stage a coup. The trust approached the football club board and just said, look, you've got no hope. You've tried your best. Why don't you give somebody else a go? And essentially, the trust got 3/4 of the club board to resign, and they were replaced by Supporters Trust board members. The new football club board held an AGM, got votes passed to basically change some parts of the club's constitution to allow for community ownership, because it had a bit of a complex structure where no one person or entity could own more than 3%, which obviously creates an issue if you want the Supporters Trust to be the majority shareholder. So we got that removed. We got all unallocated shares in the limited company to be given to the Supporters Trust to make it the 46% shareholder. then of these minority shareholders that were left that had 3% or less, a number of them donated their shares to the supporters trust to take it over that magic 51% number. And that it's a bit funny really, because we're not officially community owned yet, because that process hasn't quite been finished yet, but we are all but in name. And then also in this AGM, we got a mechanism put in place where when the supporters trust gets 60% of the shares in the football club, they can effectively hoover up the remaining 40% through like a sort of nominal fee sort of offer to the rest, and they sort of have to. It's what they call a drag and tag, for those who are aware. So yeah, it's been a bit of a strange situation, a bit of a strange journey, but now the club is firmly in control of the supporters trust. In the next couple of months we'll get it finally confirmed that we've made it over that 51% number. And the most amazing news for us is, after a 7-year absence from the city of Worcester, we'll be moving back in the 2021 season. We've struck a deal with the local football association, who are renovating a modest non-league grounds back in the city, half a mile away from our original home. It's going to be 1,300 capacity, so it'll be ample for what we need, and it's going to provide us a foundation to build on and effectively start again. Our biggest challenges, are going to be the fact that the old football club board were just seen, they had such a bad reputation for the way they ran the football club, that we've got a lot of work to build the trust back in the city and make them want to support the club. But, already we've been falling over ourselves with offers from people and companies that want to help the club now that they know we're fan owned. So yeah, we're effectively starting again from very modest beginnings, but we've managed to stop the downward spiral because the old club board really had momentum, and at one point we did think that we weren't far away from the end of Worcester City.
That's an absolutely amazing story. You must feel so good taking the club home.
I mean, it's going to be genuinely going to be an incredible day, and I'll tell you something which gives away my age. I mean, I'm 23 years old, and I've actually never seen Worcester play in Worcester. For my life, of watching the club, I never saw the team actually play in the city that it carries the name of. So it's going to be a fantastic day, and we just really can't wait. Like John was talking about with Bangor, about being a central pillar to the community and essentially being a part of it. We're already seeing signs that we've got the opportunity to build that.
How did what did the previous owners say when they put you through a triple relegation?
Well, it was a strange situation, because we didn't necessarily have like one person that was the owner. We had this. It was almost like an early attempt at community ownership. Our constitution was from like 1928. And basically, no one person could own more than 3% of the shares, but it'd been corrupted over decades and decades. We had sort of families that would all have family members all owning 3% each, and they almost had like a sort of a monopoly, if that makes sense. But yeah, going back, on the question that you asked, what did they say? It was just it was really quite nonchalant. They almost tried to get away with it and see if anyone would notice. It was honestly, I've never known anything like it, and it was just I mean, the worst thing about it was, at the time, City fans thought that we had a chance of staying up, and the last game of the season was AFC Fylde away, and 500 or so City fans made the trip from the West Midlands, up to Lancashire to go to this game, and spent money to stay overnight. They thought their team could stay up. They lost the game and went down. But can you imagine the news the next day or later that week to then find out you're actually going down 3 leagues? It was quite something. Yeah,
it's an astonishing story. I'd really never heard that depth of the story before. It's wow. Fabian, can I go to you and ask you about your work in São Pauli Museum? Could you tell us a bit about its role in terms of preserving and developing a fan culture?
Yeah, so I think the most interesting part is the background story, how the museum got developed, because it's already part of our history. And so by the German law, every professional football club has to have a police station in or around the stadium where the police can do their daily work during a match day. And they had a great idea to put it in the new stand that was built in our stadium, the Gegengrade. And so next to the place where the police station was supposed to go, there was the social pedagogical, we call it FEN project. I don't think you have something like this in the UK, but it's basically social worker working with the younger fan base. And everybody said, look, if we have a police station next to it, imagine a young ultra comes to the Fanladen and says, well, I have trouble with the police because I did a graffiti last night or whatever, and they catched me. And imagine next to it, there is the police station. So the fans argued that's not a good mix. So they went to the city government and to the club and said, we don't want a police station, but we want a museum, because that was something the club never had. And they had a museum, but it was based in containers in front of the, like, these ship containers in front of the ground, and it was a little bit shitty, let's say. Yeah, and that went well. Nobody expected that, but then they built a police station outside of the ground, a little bit away from the fan project, and we got the place for the museum, and that was a huge thing for the whole fan base. And so we started to bring everything the people had at home that was still in the club to that museum to keep everything. And then back in November 2017, we could offer the first open the first exhibition, and that was about a very important debate that was going on for years and years. It was about the history of our club during the National Socialist time, because this history is not that, let's say, good, or it was a very shameful role, because our club was really working side by side with the fascist regime, and they got a lot of benefits from that, and it turned into what it is today in the 80s. And since that, this debate was going on. So maybe you noticed our stadium got renamed, because it turned out that the old president, he was member of the NSDAP and all that stuff. So it was a good exhibition to open the whole museum, and everybody saw where the museum stands within the fan base. So it's a political thing. It keeps all the community stuff. It's not a museum where you go in and you see one trophy next to the other, and you see the bus and the cars of players and the replica shirts. So it's more the history of the community you can see there. And so that's why we decided to do the next exhibition about how the club turned into what it is today, back in the 1980s, when the people from the big squads near the harbor came to the club and brought their politics in. So that's basically what made the club what it is today. And so, and we do it in a way that everybody can really feel it. So during the National Socialist exhibition, we built a little room that was like a bombed stadium. So we brought actual stones and stuff like this. Or when we did the other exhibition, we built a barricade with like burned car parts and all that stuff to get people back into that feeling of the 1980s. Or we get that 1980s dressing room built up there. You could open the cupboard, and then you had the displays within that. So, and I think this kind of mix really, keeps the idea of connecting the history with the of the club with the history of the fan base. And I think that's the core of the museum. It's never only about the great successes that we don't even have. Our club was never that successful, played in Europe or stuff like this. Only 1 year in the first league within the last 10 years. So that's not the stuff we can display or we want to display. So it's a community museum.
Excellent. So how do you decide which stories and which events you present and include from those that you don't, or those that you take out sometimes and put back in at other times? How do you make your selection of the stories for the museum?
So there is a board of the museum. You can join the museum you could join as a club. It's set up in the same structure as a football club, but as a museum, you can join, be a member, go to the meetings, and then you decide what to do. And in the same time, we we adapt the topics from the fan base. So, for example, I heard that you will have a debate about fantastic females later.
That's
That
right.
was a huge thing in Germany as well, and so this exhibition was displayed in the museum as well. So we try to do a mix of what comes from the fan base and then what comes from outside of, let's say, the football cosmos or the football culture in Germany. For example, fantastic females. And we also rent rent the room for external initiatives and stuff like this. For example, we rented to a wheelchair sports organization, and they could do a display about how wheelchair sports works. And so that's the mix that we try to get in. But in the end, it's always a democratic vote about what's on there and what's not on there.
Excellent. We're at 22 and my questions are about done. So could I invite questions from the floor? I think I've seen a couple of interesting comments from Matt Johnson on the comment board. So Matt, would you like to talk about those comments?
Yeah, it's just responding to the comment about FC United in the chat box. I'm not only secretary of the Trust of Bangor 1876. I've been a member of FC United for about 7 years as well.
Okay.
Mainly based around looking for Eric, and I noticed how good that felt for the people who were involved, and so I started going to watch them, and then I joined eventually because I went to a pre-season game in Rill where they were playing, and I saw someone with a form, and I just took it from there.
Excellent.
So I've been quite. Sorry.
I said excellent.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so I joined up, and so I've been taking an interest in their sort of the history ever since. And I think their problem started when they moved to the new ground, Broadhurst Park, because of the way it was funded and everything, and they became a bigger club then. And some of the issues around how they were run before they had their own ground and then after they had their own ground is led to some problems with the board, and then other people felt that there was a sort of like an ossified board that developed at the top and it wasn't listening and things. So those are the two comments I've basically made. That the first one is that the club needs to remember to respect the constitution they created. And the second thing is to make sure that there's a democratic process at the core of the club, because that basically allows everyone to feel like it's their club because they've got a say in it. And having democratic ethos allows people to not only feel part of it, but helps them to improve stuff by bringing forward their ideas. And basically by being democratic, it allows people to think that they can do something rather than they're dictated to. They can have an actual proper role within that club. So that's basically what I was trying to.
I think that exactly chimes with one of the points that Fabian made about getting people involved and giving them that sense of belonging and participation in the club. You know, fans as being not just passive fans, but having a participatory role in what the football club means, I think.
Yes, it's definitely, since I've been involved in 1876 as well, it's just, I was sort of in the periphery of FC United. I'd turn up to games, but I was obviously there in Manchester and I'm in North Wales, so I didn't really take that much of a proper role in it, apart from paying for my membership every year. But with 1876, I can see definitely how, as Jonathan said before, we had a bit of a sort of ill feeling developed in the 2 years before 1876 started, with the ownership of Bangor City changing, and then people were drifting away because of that. So ever since 1876 started, as Jonathan explained, people have been drifting back, and we had an open day last year, and it was nice to see so many people that I hadn't seen for a couple of years, especially within the football context. Obviously, you see them walking down the street, but to chat about the good old days or even just, happy memories was really good. So I think, the democratic process in terms of clubs is I think it's very attractive to people.
It drives home that very point of football clubs being part of the community, doesn't it?
Yeah,
you know, you
definitely.
see those people at those events, and you talk to them about the football. You talk to them about everyday life away from the football as well. It drives home that point of the football club in the community. I think I could see Fabian's hand up.
Yeah, I got a expert for Zoom now because we're using that in the teaching, so that's why I found that very nice function. I would like to answer to that because FC United is one of the 8 clubs I do my PhD with, or that's part of the sample. And of course, I came over that topics you mentioned, and as far as I'm with my analyzing my material, I'm in the middle of it at the moment. I see a lack of what I would call a public sphere at FC United. What led to that? Because I think it began with people had the feeling that let's call it the board or the government of the club, they're doing stuff without letting everybody else know. And I think that wasn't necessarily the case. So they just had the idea that they want to run the club in the best way. And a lot of people said, yeah, but we want to know about it and who is who. That's one point. And then this book came out and I bought a copy of it, and I found it very strange that the person who did the book decided to put private emails and stuff like that into public, because that also harms the public sphere. There is no trust then, and I think that leads to lack of public sphere, democratic debates, because everybody not trust each other anymore. And then you have the lack in in trust for each other, because you always had the feeling at FC United, and I'm also a member, that it doesn't matter what you say, maybe somebody puts it into a book or into a forum and get you word by word. So I wrote the book, and I could even find something about me in the book because I was doing the community work with them, and I'm not expected that. And I remember that was saying something like that, we have this guy from Germany, he does the wrong community work, and that's not how you should discuss stuff. So I think putting everything on the internet or into books and all that stuff, it's not really working. You have to have meetings and you have to talk face to face, or like doing stuff like this now. But I think that really failed, and I think they have to recover from that. I think they slowly doing, but yeah, it was like an earthquake for them.
I see Luke's hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in on that point about trust, and just lead back into my experience. When having a democratic structure and having transparency in the organisation of the football club, if it's as a fully sort of community-owned club, or if it's via a supporters trust, it's just so important. One of the first things that we did when the trust got control of the football club was we did a bit of a sort of warts and all at the club AGM, because the fans, shareholders, trust members, nobody had heard anything in terms of the club's financial performance for 5-6 years, and we found that we showed the AGM audience exactly what the club's turnover and expenses had been up to the point that we took over, and we got a lot of sort of respect and trust for that, because they realised that times had changed. It wasn't cloak and dagger and smoke and mirrors as it had been before. Sometimes having that transparency, even if it's a situation, so far, touch wood, we haven't made any massive mistakes, but even if you make a mistake at board level, having that transparency and creating that accountability to the supporters is so important, and they'll appreciate that more than trying to hide or cover something, if that makes sense.
It does. May I take any more questions? I'm sure the lack of questions reflects being absolutely gripped to the topic. I suppose we're on about time, actually, given that it's coming up for 10 to. So I wondered if I could just return to each of the panelists, first of all to thank them, but to tell us a little bit more about how we can find out more about their football clubs or football organisations, because there's some fantastic stories there. So if we go, I see Luke on the screen now. So Luke.
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about Worcester City, you can find us on our website, which is worcestercityfc.org. And if you just Google Worcester City FC Supporters Trust, we've got a lot more information on there about what we're about and what we're working towards. And for SD Europe, if you want to find out more about us, again, if you just Google SD Europe, you can find out all about the organisation and what we're working towards and some of the projects that we've got going on at the moment, which are quite exciting. On the European level.
Tremendous stuff. And over to Jonathan.
Yeah, so we're at Bangor 1876 on Twitter, also on Facebook, Bangor1876.com on the web, where you can read interviews on our website with our manager, one of our players, and we have a regular feature, because we're a fan-owned club, Fan Focus Friday, where we have supporter interviews that we try to do fairly regularly. We've got some of those up on our homepage at the moment, so feel free to pop over, have a read, and follow us on social media. We're also on Instagram as well.
Great, thank you. Spoken like you're the press officer, aren't you, as well?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, part of the team, I should add. So got quite a few people chipping in with different things. Matt, who's here today, David, who's our club secretary, has done some fantastic stuff looking at the history of football in Bangor and variety of different football teams in Bangor over the years that have featured on our club website within the last few weeks, which is really, I think, interested people of all sorts of different generations in the local area.
Great, thank you. And over to Fabian.
Yeah, so at all about St. Pauli, you can, they have an English Twitter page. You can find it there, so it keeps all the English news about our main club going, but also in the museum we try to attract an English audience. So if you come across our museum, you can bring your mobile phone, and we have little QR codes you can scan, and then you get the whole exhibition in English. So we are not too sure what time we can really open to the public again because of Corona, but it seems not to take that long anymore. But I have to say, for what we do with my project in the museum, the educational work, we not yet have any English material, because it's, you know, it's for the local schools and all that stuff, so there was no need to translate it so far. But if you're interested, that we did a presentation about it on the football history conference in Manchester, and we still have the slides and the material there, so you can send me an email. You find me on my on the homepage of our museum or the project, and I can send it to you. Yeah, that's basically where you can find us. But if it's okay, I would like to ask a question to the other both about their club. It's interesting for me, what kind of community work or youth work do you do within your fan-owned, community-owned clubs? So
over to Jonathan first, maybe.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, we're still in the process of putting in place a variety of different structures, because we're a club that's barely a year old. We have a variety of teams from quite a young age, boys and girls teams. In the coming year, we're hoping to build and strengthen our community work. Our director of football, Ewan Williams, is very much passionate about that. We've already got funding for a football and mental health project run in collaboration with the Football Association of Wales Trust and the charity Mind Cymru. And there are one or two other things that we are trying to move forward on, and we're hoping that over the summer we'll be able to announce one or two other developments in terms of working with the community in all sorts of exciting ways.
Superb. And over to Luke.
Yeah, so just quickly, sort of similarly to John, because we're sort of still going through this process. We have, and you know, as we've been outside of the city, we haven't really managed to massively get our teeth into the community work, but it is something that we really want to do. Something we did manage to do whilst playing outside the city was obviously we had an older section, quite an older section of our fans who because we don't play in Worcester anymore, couldn't really get to games. You know, they used to be able to walk, but now, you know, they couldn't. So we struck a partnership with the local Age UK to provide free bus transport to and from games. And the idea behind this was obviously, you know, as we've spoken about, going to a football match can really bring about a sense of belonging, and a lot of our older fans will have lost that. So it was about trying to bring that back and that bit of social interaction that you know, you do get from football. But as I say, you know, when we move back to Worcester for the 2021 season, or whenever it starts, you know, it is something that we're looking to do a lot more of.
Great, that's absolutely fantastic. So I'm conscious of time. I've noticed Jean is on the has joined the group in readiness for the next session at 11 now. So I'll draw this session to a close. Thank all the guests once again. Thank you so much for your stories, for everything that you've told us. What a fantastic session. And I'll press pause on the Football Collective sessions for about 6 minutes until we start again with Jean. So thank you very much.